Ascendai, the Destiny Crest. Audiobook by Robinson and Walsh. Chapter 14, A Great Day. Accio tossed the sword to him. Colt caught it and strapped it onto his back with the hilt protruding up over one shoulder. Accio nodded in approval and said, "Now draw your sword." "Yes, master," Colt said, feeling a rush of excitement as he reached back and grabbed the hilt. It slid from the sheath with a quiet hiss, and he held it before him in a gleaming arc. As he stared at the blade, he and Samson began to emit a bright blue glow, like the one that had surrounded them the day they met. Accio stepped back, alarmed by what he was seeing. "Colt," he called to the still boy. "Colt, are you okay?" He moved forward quickly, reaching out to grab the sword that he believed had started the strange phenomena, but was stopped by Samson as he stepped between them. The big, glowing wolf let out a low growl until Accio backed away. The old man knew the animal was unlikely to let any harm come to the boy, so he calmly sat cross-legged on the ground. He kept his watchful eyes firmly on his newest pupil as he waited to see what would happen next. After only a few minutes, the blue glow faded, and Colt let out the blade fall to his side, his eyes unfocused and far away. Accio stood and approached him slowly. "Colt, are you okay?" The young man's eyes slowly focused on him, and he said quickly, "Master, I'm sorry. I could see you talking to me, and I tried to answer. I just couldn't," he apologized, concern in his voice. "Don't worry about that," the master said, dismissing the apology. "Can you explain what happened?" "Maybe a little. At least I can try." Colt wasn't sure how he could ever really explain what happened when an idea came to him. "I could just show him," he thought. "Master, I think I know a better way to explain," he said, lifting the sword back up in front of him. "I have never even held a sword before today." Then he began to move. Accio watched in amazement as Colt manipulated the blade around his body with amazing speed and precision. He moved around the clearing, whirling the sword as he jumped and spun, mixing in kicks and other martial arts techniques. It was as if he were an expert who had trained his entire life. He moved back in front of the stunned master and jumped up, spinning his body quickly around. Then he landed lightly in front of his teacher. As his feet touched the ground, he swiped the sword across in front of him and kneeled gracefully at his master's feet. He then elegantly placed the sword back in its sheath. Colt looked up at Accio. "I think I would do better if I were using two swords," he said apologetically. "One felt a little awkward." Accio was in shock. The boy's performance had looked as though he had just destroyed 100 invisible enemies within the camp. He had been training for most of his life, and he knew that not many reached the caliber of skill he had just witnessed. Only his years spent developing his self-control allowed the old man to keep his composure. He knew how important humility was for a warrior, and that it was a hard characteristic for teenage boys to maintain. He'd seen that first-hand with his other pupils. "Has this happened before?" he asked calmly. "I have visions, and sometimes dreams that teach me things that I need to know," Colt answered, rising to his feet and placing his hand on Samson's back as the wolf came to his side. "This is the first time I've ever gotten a vision from touching something, but I do get these little knowledge downloads pretty frequently." "So the sword triggered the vision?" Accio asked. "I'm not positive, but I felt it coming over me as I pulled it from its sheath. It's almost as if I'm being taught things as I need them." Colt paused and thought back on his vision. It had seemed to go on for hours to him, but he knew it had only lasted a short time. "You know," he continued thoughtfully, "I think the information is being passed to me from the divine hunters of the past." "Interesting," the old man said. "Usually when I have visions I see a fierce Indian warrior wearing war paint who is a very scary-looking black wolf. But this time I saw an older-looking Oriental man with a gray wolf. I think he may have been a samurai." He looked at Accio, checking his reaction to what he had told him. He was relieved at the thoughtful look he saw on his master's face. He didn't want the old man to think he was insane. "You know, Colt, I have a thought about your visions. A theory of sorts," Accio said. "Really? What is it?" Colt asked. He was excited that Accio not only seemed to believe him, but also had ideas about why or what was happening to him. "It appears to me that you may have had more visions of the Indian man due to the amount of time you have had to spend living alone off the land." Colt looked at Accio, unsure of what he was trying to say. "And now," Accio continued, "you have the need to handle a sword, so a master samurai appears and gives you the information that you require." Colt nodded his head in agreement, as understanding of what Accio was implying became clearer to him. It seems to me that whichever divine hunter of the past is better equipped for each situation is the one that passes on their knowledge. Samson may be the vessel, he said, looking at the huge wolf by Colt's side. Samson looked back at him, his intelligent eyes fixed on Accio, as though he knew what the old man was saying. He may be a reincarnation of the past divine wolves, or he is somehow able to draw from their knowledge. It is also interesting to me that when you were unable to move, he protected you. I think he understood what was happening. I believe this wolf is highly intelligent, and I don't just mean for an animal. I believe he is probably much more than we realize. He is very special to me, Colt said, rubbing Samson's head. The wolf nudged him back gently. Well, Accio said with a smile, since you won't be needing sword training anymore, I'd like to spend our time together testing your and Samson's speed and agility. I need to see what I am working with. Yes, master, Colt said eagerly as he handed the trainer's sword back to Accio. Accio smiled again as he took the sword back. I will see about getting you a couple of more suitable swords as soon as I can. Come, he said as he walked towards the forest. Let's find a more suitable place to test your abilities. Then Accio led them a short distance to a dense section of the forest. I know that you both have incredible speed and strength, but I'm interested to see what you can do with it. Yes, master, Colt answered, excited to begin. Try and find me, Accio said, and instantly threw something on the ground in front of Colt and Samson, then vanished in a puff of smoke. That was awesome, Colt thought. Then he settled himself and began to focus. He breathed in deep and tried to pick up Accio's scent, but couldn't. That's not regular smoke. The aroma that floated through the air was a mixture of smoke and... Is that blood? It smells like blood. He was confused for a moment, and then it came to him. It's for confusing vampires. He smiled, impressed with his master's creativity. Man, he is smart. Let's find him, pal, he said, looking at Samson intensely. Samson began moving around the area, searching for any trace of Accio. Colt watched patiently as he paced around and scent-checked the area. Samson stopped suddenly and looked up at the treetops. I'm with you, pal, he said, peering up. I think he's up there, too. Then with one giant leap, he was almost 20 feet up the tree. He leapt again, moving himself to a place above the smoke that had begun to dissipate. Ah, that's better. Let's see if I can smell him now. He inhaled deeply and recognized Accio's faint but familiar scent coming from a shadow area within the trees. He strained his eyes, staring into the shadows, and half expected to see Accio, but couldn't. Master, he called out, I know you are there. He expected Accio to jump out at him, but the area was silent. Then he remembered the conversation from earlier. The shadow form technique. He's in the shadows. He was unsure of how the information could help him, but he felt certain that that was why he couldn't see Accio. He remained still and slowed his breathing as he focused himself in a renewed effort to locate his master. Down below, Samson stared into the treetop where Colt was. He could feel that something wasn't right, and that feeling was immediately transferred to Colt. As Samson stared upward, he noticed a shadow above Colt slowly stretching down toward him. At that moment, Accio seemed to explode from the shadow and swung his sword swiftly at his unsuspecting student. Colt didn't see or hear the attack coming, but something inside him told him to move quickly. So he pushed himself away from the tree with intense force, narrowly escaping Accio's trap. As he floated free, he flipped backwards and grabbed onto another nearby tree. He hung there upside down, holding on tight, and then looked up to see where Accio was. When Colt saw him, he couldn't help but grin. He had noticed Accio smiling, but it didn't last long. Accio quickly erased his smile and replaced it with his usual serious look. However, Colt knew that he had pleased his master, and that made him happy. They both dropped down and landed softly on the ground beside Samson. Good job, pal, Colt said as he placed his hand on his companion. Then he looked over at Accio and said, Master, that vanishing in smoke is awesome. Was that blood we smelled? Yes, Accio answered. It's called a blood bomb. We use it to disorient vampires, and it makes it very hard for them to track us. Sweet, Colt said enthusiastically. I can't wait to learn how to use those. I will teach you soon, but not today. He smiled and continued. Right now we have a lot of work to do. Accio spent the next few hours testing them both and was very pleased with what he had seen. When he was finished, he led them back to camp. Colt was grinning from ear to ear. He had really enjoyed the one-on-one time he got to spend with Master Accio. He felt great and wasn't sure if he should say anything, but couldn't stop himself. Thanks for working with me, Master. I had fun. Accio bowed his head to him slightly. He had enjoyed the day too, but it wasn't like him to come out and say it. As they continued their trek to camp, all the things Colt had done and learned reeled in his mind. Without even realizing that he was thinking aloud, he said, "It's been a great day." Off in another part of the forest, Crimson and Sandy spent the afternoon reviewing the morning lesson. Crimson pushed her hard, expecting perfection, but Sandy didn't mind. She wanted to be the best she could be. When they finished, Sandy thanked Crimson and they started back towards camp. As they walked, they came across a clearing with a small stream running through it. "Do you mind if we stop and rest for a minute?" Sandy asked with longing as the sun reflected off the water. "Yeah, sure," Crimson answered. Sandy found a large rock that overlooked the stream and was warmed by the sun that cut through the trees around them. She sat down with a sigh of contentment. Crimson grinned and walked over to lean against a tree close to where she sat. "Thanks for working with me," she said as she bent down and slipped off her shoes. "No problem." "What are you doing?" He frowned as she began rolling up her pants legs. "I'm going to put my feet in the water for a minute," she said as she stood and walked down to the stream. "Ah, that feels nice," she said as she stepped into the cool mountain water. Crimson shook his head at her and grinned. "Come on in, it feels great," she invited as she gestured for him to join her. Crimson shook his head at her. "I don't think so." "Oh, come on, you've been killing me out here for hours," she teased. "The least you can do is goof off with me for a couple minutes." Crimson looked at her, considering. The mountain stream looked refreshing, and he could tell that she really wanted him to join her. "I'm not really much of a goof-off kind of person," he said, not wanting to hurt her feelings, but unsure of what to say. Sandy sighed in frustration, but wasn't going to give up that easily. "I know, but you can't always be serious. Everyone needs to have a little fun sometimes," she said as she splashed him. She giggled as he jumped back, trying to avoid getting wet. "I have fun," he said defensively. "Prove it," she dared him. "Take your shoes off and come in." "Maybe next time," he said as he grinned at her. "All right, but I'm going to hold you to that," she said with a playful glare. She spent the next few minutes wading around, enjoying the water and the peaceful moment. Then she climbed out, splashing Crimson again as she passed him. "I got you twice," she said teasingly. "You know, you really need to work on your reflexes a little more," she added, as she pushed him playfully on her way back to the rock. "We'd better get back," he said, smiling at her as he picked up her shoes and handed them to her. Sandy didn't want to leave, but she knew that he was right. She slipped on her shoes and took one more look around the beautiful area before they began the trek back towards the camp. Sandy's spirits were high, and she teased Crimson playfully as she walked beside him. The serious young man didn't say much, but listened as she chattered away. Sandy was enjoying herself immensely, and for the first time since she had met him, Crimson looked as though he was actually a little relaxed. "This has been a great day," she thought to herself. "A great day."